I am now. Okay, so welcome to week 7. In my class, well, for today, we're going to be covering week 6 and 7. So we're going to be covering 5 chapters, 11 and 12 from last week, and then 25, 26, 27 for this week. Okay, so welcome to all of Dr. Lundy's students. If you could put your name in the chat so I can send that attendance to her, I would appreciate it. So for this week, let's get back to the peer review. Okay, so the peer review is for us to, the professors to grade on. Okay, if the groups are working good together, good group dynamics, producing a good good paper, then we'll take care of grading that. That's more for, or you'll get the points for that. If there are issues with the groups as far as participation, as far as doing your share, as far as issues within the group, that's how we'll use the peer review. Okay, does that make sense? So do not worry, there's no peer review form for you guys to fill out. Does that help, Chantel?
Yeah, it was just different last term, so I was telling her something different.
Yeah, we had a peer review form last term and that didn't work out too well. So we just kind of backed off it for this term.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the peer review. Okay, my group, I don't know if Dr. Lundy has sent this out yet, but my group, I have sent you out a couple of days ago 2 things for preparation for exam 3. We're trying to give you as much notice as possible. So we tried to give you 10, 11, 12 days notice. So a couple of days ago, I sent out the exam review schedule along with the exam 3 study guide. Anybody get that? Everybody get that?
Yes, Dr. Lundy sent that.
Got it.
Okay, so Dr. Lundy's students have that as well. Awesome. Okay, so that's the reason why we sent it out so early is we want to give you guys an opportunity to try and plan ahead. We tried to spread them out again over 4 days, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I know a lot of people work on the weekends. I know a lot of people have clinicals towards the end of the week too. So if you can get to one, that's great. We'll do the same thing as last time. We'll send out the recordings. So you'll have 4 live opportunities and 4 recordings. Okay. I just sent out earlier, maybe an hour ago, an announcement, and I'm sure Dr. Lundy will too, but I sent out an announcement. One of our professors, Professor Price, did a couple of additional Kahoots for practice for you guys. One focuses on ADPI only, and the other one focuses on levels of prevention. I spoke with a student a bit ago that had already started, I think, the levels of prevention and said it was excellent. So I encourage you all to take advantage of looking at both of those extra Kahoots. I know Kahoots is supposed to be kind of a group activity and a competition and all that, but if you can review the Kahoots on your own, I'm cool with it as long as you're getting the information. Okay, there's just too little time to squeeze in all these group activities, and I'd rather you do it on your own just to get the information. So feedback so far is these Kahoots are awesome. So one full one on ADPI, one full one on levels of prevention. Speaking of levels of prevention, most of the incorrect questions that are coming up for me for exam 1 and 2, and I've already met with several students with exam 2, are either ADPI questions or levels of prevention. So here's my suggestion with levels of prevention. We need to have a solid understanding of it. Okay, we have to. And as I explained at the beginning of the course, levels of prevention are going to have little specific boxes in every chapter, okay, that identifies what is a primary, what is a secondary, what is a tertiary for that particular chapter. Okay, so whether it's epidemiology, environmental health, community assessment, school nursing, hospice nursing, home health nursing, prevention levels are going to look different. Okay, they all have the same underlying definition, right? We know the primary is education and teaching and prevention. We know that secondary is early identification and screening. We know that tertiary is you already have the issue, you already have the diagnosis, whatever's going on, and that then we work to minimize complications and try and provide information for the best quality outcome. But they already have the issue like diabetes or if they had a stroke. But the one thing I don't want people to get tripped up on is that tertiary also includes education. In what way? Somebody give me an example.
Give yourself an insulin, education on giving yourself insulin injection if your blood sugar is over
So
180.
don't
Disease
get,
education.
yeah. So don't get tripped up if you see the word education in the tertiary level, in the tertiary prevention, because if you have diabetes, it's going to require teaching and education. If you have a stroke, it's going to require teaching and education. You need to think about primary in terms of education towards prevention. Make sense? So don't get tripped up on that. So here's my suggestion for a good drill on levels of prevention. Start with this week's chapters, 11, 12, 25, 26, 27. Go back to the book, pull up those 5 chapters, pull up those 5 boxes of levels of prevention in each of those chapters and read them. Okay? Read them and reread them and reread them again. Okay? Once you've done these 5 chapters after today, next week is a heavy week. We do 8 chapters. Go to next week. Go to next week. Go pull up those 8 boxes of prevention, levels of prevention. Read them, reread them. And then if you want to keep going, go backwards to the chapters that were covered in the past. Every single chapter has a level of prevention box. We have to have that embedded in our knowledge, not just for this class, for every class. Just like we have to have embedded our ADPI. We have to be able to take our ADPI and our levels of prevention, and we have to be able to articulate both of those for each of these topics we're covering. So our ADPI for a hospital admission of a pediatric patient is going to be a whole lot different than our ADPI doing a community assessment. But the foundations are still the same. The foundation of the nursing process is still the same, but we have to be able to transition that thinking from inpatient to the community. Does that make sense? So what do you guys think about that little activity? About going back and just reading and reading and reading and reading about these different chapter level of prevention. What do you guys think?
Sounds good.
That's my suggestion. So anyway, okay. For Dr. Lundy's students, the ones that came in towards the end, please put your name in the chat box that you've attended. Did Dr. Lundy cover week 6 last week or send out a video? Have you guys covered 11 and 12? Because this first part for you guys will be a repeat if she did. So I apologize for that.
She did 2 recordings for the content over 11 and 12, so that we were just ours to watch on our own.
Okay. Okay. So this is going to be a repeat for you guys. All right. So for me, what I like to do is I like to quickly go through the PowerPoint, since the PowerPoint is an outline of the chapter. And then I like to go into the book and pull out the essential knowledge that we need to understand to be able to meet the objectives of the chapter, and also to be able to have the core information to support the concept. That's what we need to know. Okay, so let's start with chapter 11. So this is from last week. Okay, so chapter 11 starts with using health education and groups in the community. Why is health education in the community so important? I'm asking you guys. Oops, I didn't share my screen, did I? I did not share my screen. Hang on. Nope. Let's go to, where am I going? There we go. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay. Why is health education so important in the community? And how is it used? How do we determine how it's used?
using health education, it can help with prevent like either prevention of like diseases or helping people manage a disease and things
Think
like
about
that.
think about your discussion question you just did this week. Right? Discussion question 3. Right? That was all about how we support individuals, families, and communities, right? With education. So for my group, we review the objectives, okay? Because the expectation is after reviewing this chapter and the information in it, you should be able to articulate these objectives. Okay, how do people learn? What are the steps and principles that guide health education? Right? What's the importance of literacy, especially health literacy? What do you do if you're working with a group that is health illiterate? Okay, what factors influence group functioning when you're teaching in groups? How do certain groups learn? Okay, so we know that nurses provide information to enable our clients to attain optimal health, prevent health problems, identify health problems early, and minimize disability, right? So our education allows individuals, what we do for them allows them to make informed health-related decisions, right? And also to assume personal responsibility for their health and cope effectively with alterations in their health. Okay, so we're just going to go through this quick because we're going to go to the book. We do need to be aware, as we do in every chapter, of the healthy people objectives, goals and objectives for each chapter. This particular chapter is based on community education, their objectives. Okay. So what are some typical steps in developing a health education program? Okay. Has anybody reviewed forget I said that. Okay. Typical steps in developing a health education program. Select, identify the population, select what your your learning theory is going to be, what educational principles are most likely to increase learning. Okay. Examine what the educational issues are, design and implement a program using whatever your chosen strategies are based on who you're going to be teaching, and then evaluate the effectiveness. And remember, the PowerPoint is an outline. Okay, there's a difference between education and there's a difference between education and learning. Does anybody know what that difference is between education and learning? Important difference. Anybody articulate that for me?
Well, education is like teaching the information, but learning is like a teach back type of
Correct.
deal.
What are you going to do with the knowledge? Yes, exactly. Great. How do people learn? All right, everybody learns differently. Probably everybody in this group learns a different way. All right, people learn based on some things are based on what they already know, what they believe, based on the culture they were raised in, generational experiences, and how well do they understand and process the information they receive. Okay, so the 3 education principles, right? What is the nature of learning? We're going to cover these in the book. What is the nature of learning? What's the educational process? And what are the skills we need to be effective educators? Okay, and then you can read through these, but the next 3 slides go through what each of these are. Okay, skills of an effective educator. This is what we need to be an effective educator. How do we develop effective health education programs? Again, this is an overview. We'll get to some specifics of these in the book. What's your message? Are you sending a clear message? What's your format? Are you selecting the most appropriate learning format? What's your environment? Right? You have to create a good, healthy and A good learning environment. The experience, you have to plan for positive and meaningful learning experiences. How do you engage in participation? How do you engage your group? And then how do you evaluate that whatever your objectives were met? Who are your groups? What are the things we need to consider? Age, culture, ethnicity. Okay. Do they have pedagogy? Are they completely health illiterate and we need to do all the teaching? Or andragogy? Do they have some health literacy? We'll show you where that is in the book. And then it's really important for us to know what the barriers to learning are. And these are educational related barriers. So these would be our barriers as teachers. Okay, and then we also have to be mindful of how we use technology in health education. Okay, are we giving websites? If we are those websites useful? Are they easy to navigate for, say, an elderly population? Is it current information? Okay, so we have to be able to evaluate whether the use of technology in our health education is appropriate. And here's some slide 18. Here's some criteria that we would use to evaluate internet information. Is it credible? Is the design of the website easy for people to navigate? Are there links? I mean, I think of, some of the health information websites I use that has quality information, has good links, and I know it's authentic information. There's a lot of misinformation out there. You got to be careful what we're encouraging our clients to do. How do we evaluate the education process? How do you evaluate the teacher? How do you evaluate the program they just taught? How do you evaluate long-term if what they taught you, let's say you did an education program on how to take your own blood pressure. How do you evaluate long-term that they still have those skills and they're still doing it the right way 2 months out? Evaluation is a really important process of education. Okay, so let's go to the book and see what chapter 12. A few things I want to point out in the book that we need to know. First off the bat is first comes up is your Healthy People 2020. And in this chapter, since we're talking about community education, their goals and objectives are related to health education. So we need to know what these are. And remember, Healthy People 2020 questions on exams are wanting to know what healthy people objectives are, not what we think, what we all think is the right answer, but are they Healthy People 2020? We had a couple of recent questions that all the answers were okay. I think it was, what are we going to be teaching new parents? Okay, well, all the answers were correct. Teach about nutrition, teach about reproductive health, teach about, there was one other answer that was a great answer, but there was only one correct answer that was from Healthy People 2020, and it was the positive parenting. Do you guys remember that? So make sure when you get a Healthy People 2020 question, we're asking specifically for their goals and objectives. Okay. So the nature of learning, how do we learn? Okay. There's one way to think about the nature of learning is to examine it through 3 lenses. Okay. And here we go. Page 184, the cognitive lens, which is your thinking, the affective, which is your feeling, and your psychomotor, which is your acting. These are your 3 domains of learning. Okay. So we need to have an idea of what each, in order for us to understand how to plan education programs, we need to be able to understand these 3 domains. Okay, so then it goes through, I'm just going to review each of them real quickly. You can go back and review this. Cognitive includes memory recognition, understanding, reasoning, application, and problem solving. Okay, so your cognitive domain. What is your affective domain? Okay, includes your changes in attitudes and the development of values. So for example, we know that it's really difficult to change people's deeply rooted attitudes and beliefs and values. Does anybody know anybody that falls into this category? I do. Right? So to make such changes, people need the support and encouragement from those around them. Okay, then you have the psychomotor domain, which is the performance. So this is the teach back method. Okay, so it requires that they teach back to you, right? Clients are taught a variety of psychomotor skills, include, let's say, bathing infants, changing a dressing, giving themselves injections, monitoring their glucose levels, taking blood pressures. Okay, so that's how we teach in the psychomotor domain. Okay. Okay, box 11.1, let's review that. What are the steps of a needs assessment? Right, because if we're putting together a community education program, we need to know, we have to have a topic. We need to do a needs assessment. What does this community need? So this is, what does the client want to know? What data are we going to collect and how are we going to collect it? So we analyze, so this is the nursing process, analyze our assessment data and identify cognitive, affective, and psychomotor learning needs, right? What is going to increase your client's ability and motivation to learn? And then lastly, assist the client to prioritize learning needs. And this is important. Factors that can influence a person's learning needs and ability to learn are there's multiple factors. Demographic factors, physical, geographic, economic, psychological, social, and spiritual, right? We have to be able to understand what the prior knowledge already is from your clients. What's the prior knowledge? What skills do they have? Are they motivated or are they not motivated? Because if they're not motivated, we have to take a different approach. If they are motivated, great. Right? What if we're teaching a hearing impaired group? How does that look? What if we're teaching a visually impaired group? How does that look? What if we're teaching kindergartners versus high schoolers? How does that look? Okay. So here's a section on selecting appropriate educational methods. Okay. Choosing educational methods that will facilitate the efficient and successful accomplishment, pardon me, of program goals and objectives. Right. So choose the simplest, clearest, most succinct manner of presentation to avoid complex program designs. Try to vary methods to hold the attention of the learners to meet the needs of different learners. You may have a group that everybody has a different style of learning in the group. How are you going to meet all of their needs? Okay, so have a look at this paragraph. It's on page 186. This is excellent too. Box 11.2. How do you effectively teach? You use the teach mnemonic. Okay, so tune in, edit, act, clarify, and honor. So have a look at that. And when choosing, here's some additional information. When we're choosing educational methods, we're going to have to consider age, gender, culture, developmental disabilities, special learning needs, educational level, Size of the group. And this is what I was just talking about. What do we do for visually impaired? Well, they may need more of a verbal description. What do we do with the hearing impaired or language limitations? They may need more visual material. Okay. What do you do with learners that have limitations with attention and concentration? Well, you're going to have to be creative. Use creative methods and tools to keep them focused, right? Do they maybe need more frequent breaks? Maybe need quiet surroundings with limited distractions. So have a look at this as well right here. Okay. And then here's our levels of prevention. Let's go through it. We're talking about developing community education programs. Let's talk about it. What does a primary look like? Education at health fairs regarding immunizations for children, older adults, and people with chronic diseases. Why is that primary?
Because it's before they have any kind of disease. They're being taught. It's an educational teaching.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. Secondary, education at health fairs regarding early diagnosis and treatment of diabetes, along with providing health screenings and the goal of shortening disease duration and severity. Why is that secondary?
Because you're doing a screening.
And you're trying to identify early,
Right. Mhm.
right? So that you can get these people treated early. Or I always think of secondary also as early identification and early intervention. Okay. And then tertiary, education in a rehab center or an adult daycare center to help individuals who have had a stroke maximize their functioning. Why is that tertiary?
Because it's in an adult daycare center, so, or a rehab center, which is usually older adults who already have the issues.
Okay, so in this particular example, what's the example of that?
Well, they've already had a stroke, so
Exactly.
they're trying to maximize their function.
Yep. So they've already had the issue. The medical issue has already happened. Now you're trying to help them manage it. You're trying to rehab them so that ultimately they can get back as much of their functioning as possible. Okay. And so here's a good example of what I was talking about not getting tripped up with the education in tertiary. Okay, so look, we have education in primary. Well, we have education, education, education. So don't let that word keep you in the primary prevention thinking mode. There is education at every level. Okay.
And you just have to look at the situation.
Exactly. Exactly. Yep. Does everybody understand that? This is a great example of education at every level. So let's think of three other words then. So primary, I'm going to say prevention. Secondary, I'm going to say screening. Tertiary, I'm going to say management. Because I'm assuming that education is in all three. Make sense? So in order for me not to get confused, I'm going to think of three other words. Get it? Make sense, guys?
Yes,
Yes.
Yeah.
Does that help?
yes.
Can you please give me an example of the secondary prevention with the education? Let me see that it how regarding, because there was a question on the test and I got a little confused.
Okay, so let's just read this. Education at a health fair regarding early diagnosis and treatment of diabetes, along with providing health screenings for the goal of shortening disease and duration. So the education, right? Let's say you have identified people that may be at risk for developing diabetes. Okay, you have identified they're at risk. So you're going to do some education and teach them why they're at risk and how you can prevent that risk from hopefully going any further. Right? So early identification, early intervention. So you've early identified them as being at risk for possibly developing diabetes. And then you're trying to early intervention with some education on how to kind of slow that process or stop that process or reverse that process. Does that help?
Sort of. So like if, I don't remember exactly what the question was, but it was something about educating on the screening or something like that. That would be a secondary prevention, correct?
If the answer has screening in it, we know that's secondary. But don't let the if it's educate on screening, what's the most important word in that?
Educating.
No, screening, because we know education is in all three levels.
So screening, so every time I see screening, don't even question, it's definitely a secondary. Okay.
Yeah. And if it said education with screening, that's okay, because there is going to be education with screening and there's going to be education with prevention.
Okay, that
right?
you made it clear. Yeah.
And there's going to be education for tertiary.
Yeah.
They're just different.
I got them. Now that you explained, that makes sense. Actually, I know now the mistake that I made.
Does that help?
You did. Thank you.
Yep. You bet. Anybody else want to chime in on my, the more I see these incorrect questions with primary, secondary, tertiary, the more I feel like I have to really, really stop when we get to those boxes and focus on them and make sure that everybody understands why each of these are primary, secondary, and tertiary right here in this page, 186. Does anybody not understand why either of these three? Okay, and we'll cover it when we get to the next chapter too. Okay, I'm skipping through. This is an excellent box. How to use plain language in health education. Okay, how to organize your audience, how to choose. There's three areas, and they each have great bullets under there. Organize the audience, choose your words carefully, and make information easy to find. And it gives you examples, 4 or 5 examples under each one. Okay, and this isn't, this isn't just for education in the community. I think this box is wonderful because as nurses, we're teaching all the time. It doesn't matter what setting we're in. Community nursing does require lots and lots of teaching, but we're teaching whether we're in the inpatient setting, in the outpatient setting, in the community. So this applies to wherever we're working, I think. Okay. There's a few more things we need to cover in this chapter. And here we need to know the difference. It's important to know the difference of the 2 learning strategies for us to understand community education. And as I said, when we covered in the outline, what is pedagogy and what is andragogy? Okay. So learning strategies for children and individuals with little knowledge about the topic are characterized as pedagogy. Okay. And then learning strategies for mostly adults and older adults and individuals with some health-related knowledge is andragogy. Okay. It's as simple as that. Little limited health-related topic knowledge, and others that have some health-related knowledge. Okay, and it goes through, if you want to read more about that, it has a whole section on it. It's actually excellent. Okay. And then we looked at this slide in our PowerPoint, but I'd like for you to review it with a little bit more detailed information in the book. We must be aware of what potential barriers we might be facing as we're developing health education programs. All right. Fear of public speaking, lack of credibility. Does the educator know their topic? Okay. Inability to deal with challenging group members or people you're teaching. Right. Lack of information about how to motivate people to learn. Okay. So there's lots of teacher-related barriers. Okay, so that's the first. Right here, educator-related barriers. And then we go to learner-related barriers. Okay, so they're different. We have to understand what are some learner. So this is your audience. This is the people that are coming to your program. Okay, two of the most important learner-related barriers are low literacy and lack of motivation. Okay. Right. Nurses, as nurses, we often deal with individuals and populations who are illiterate or who have low literacy levels. So what are we going to do? How are we going to work with that? It may be a cultural issue. It may be a language barrier. It may be a education barrier. It may be previous injury, TBI barrier. Okay. So we have a couple of teaching models that I want you to be aware of. Okay. The first model is the health belief model. And this is typically used if you think the motivation of the learners might be a concern. That's all I need you to know about it. Okay. It's just, if you were given a question in the exam that said, here's your scenario, what would be the best model to use to teach this group? Here's your scenario of what kind of group you have. I just need you to know that the health belief model is used with, we'll use it with a group that we think is going to have we're going to have a hard time motivating. Okay. And then the other model, there's two names to it. It can go with trans-theoretical and then the precaution adoption process model. Okay. And these models are used for health promotion, right? So they're discussed together because they both deal with change that occurs in stages over time. Okay. Okay, is that it for this chapter? So box 11.5 is a good review of group role behavior. All right. And what think back of the two group projects you just completed. What was your role in the group? Right? Were you a follower? Were you a gatekeeper? Were you a leader? Were you the peacemaker? Were you a task specialist? Okay, group dynamics is really important in the profession of nursing. Rarely are we out on our own doing our own thing. We are always working in groups, whether it's working in groups with the patient and their family, with your teammates, with physicians, case management. Okay, so group having an understanding of effective and positive group dynamics is really important. Okay. And then your core competencies, communication skills and attitudes. Nothing you need to memorize, but really good information, I think. Okay. So that's what we have. I'm just making sure I covered everything. Oh, no, I want to go back and cover different populations and how we teach them. Okay, so for example, let me find this in here. Okay, bear with me. We teach different, is this it here? We teach different populations. We teach Generation X. We teach baby boomers. We teach the digital groups. And what are they learning? Everybody learns differently. How do these groups learn? I need to find this, so just hang tight. Might be here. It's in here. Does anybody review the chapter? Let's see. Well, it's not coming up like let's see.
Professor Marvel, are you looking for the like age-specific strategies?
Yes.
It-
Yes.
It's
There.
on page 190.
Yeah, there. Yep, there it is. Okay. I am population considerations. Is this what I'm looking for? Right here. Okay, so we have different groups that we're teaching. So you need to review this section here, population considerations on age and cultural and ethnic backgrounds. Okay,
What page is that on?
189. Okay, we have baby boomers. Okay, there's 3 types of groups that I want you to be aware of. And this is actually right in the study guide, I believe. Baby boomers, Generation X, and we call it the NET, N-E-T, the NET group. And what are their learning strategies? So if you are teaching 3 different groups the same information, what are your strategies to teach the baby boomers, the NET generation, and Generation X? Okay. So for example, the NET group likes to just be independent, likes to be left alone. They want to do their own thing. Where the Generation X, which is those before 1960, they like to be taught everything. Okay, so you need to go in and find out, you need to go in and have a definition or a strategy for each of those groups. Okay, does that make sense? I really wish that's not what I was
Yeah.
looking for. It's it came right up for me yesterday in my Tuesday class, but I'm not finding what I'm looking for. It is in this chapter. So I'll make sure I let Dr. Lundy know that let me see if I can find it in the nope. Okay, I'm going to move on. Let's talk about I want to bring up, I pulled these up because I want you guys to, for my groups, I'm a stickler for case studies. Okay, I think that there's a reason I send you case studies every week. And these come right from our lesson plans as instructors. And I like to go over them in class, but I don't think we're going to have time to go over them in class today. So I'm expecting you to review them. And for my group, help everybody understand why I like case studies. What is the benefit of case studies?
Help you apply what you're learning.
What, Chelsea?
I said they help you apply what you're learning and understand it better.
Yep. And what supports that? Somebody else just said it as well.
The rationale.
The rationales. The rationales in these case studies are excellent additional learning tools. Okay, so please go through these case studies that we send you. Okay, as we're formulating study guides and exams, we not only do we look at the chapters and the PowerPoint, we also look at the case studies. Okay, let's get into chapter 12, which is community assessment and evaluation. Okay, again, excuse me. have a look at your objectives. Okay, we're gonna learn this chapter how to do a community assessment. Okay, so this chapter clarifies community concepts and provides a guideline for nursing practice with a community client. Okay, so what is the definition of a community? Again, we're going to fly through this because I want to get to the book. Okay, so here's your, we can look at the community as people, place, and function. Okay, so that's, we'll cover that more in the book, but we look at a community with regards to people, who makes the community up, what is the geographical and time dimensions, and what is the function of the community? Are they an industrial community? Are they, I don't know, a college community? What kind of community are they? All right, and so the next few slides talk as review what community as a client is. Okay. And then we talk about, well, I'm going to skip through this because I really want to get to the chapter. And then we talk about community as a client all the way through the nursing process. So let me go back here because I want to, okay, right here. 9, 10, and 11. I want you to review this. Okay, this is this is the ADPI. This is transitioning your thinking to the ADPI for community focused nursing process, from assessment to an evaluation. So, okay, so in the community, I'm just going to go through assessment for right now. If we're assessing, how do we assess the community health? Well, we need to collect data. How do we collect data? Okay, what are the assessment issues? Okay, what are the problems? Every community has different problems. One community's problem may not be another community's problem. One may have an issue with low immunization rates for kids. Another community may have a high crime rate. All right, so planning in community health, we have to analyze what problems were found, establish goals and objectives, start to think about interventions, and then we implement, and then we evaluate. So if you want a really good, solid review of the ADPI in community nursing, community education, slides 9, 10, and 11 provide that. Okay. And then the other thing that's really important in community assessment, it's actually one of the priorities, is how are you planning for your personal safety when you're working in the community? Okay, personal safety is a prerequisite for effective community-oriented practice. Right, and personal safety needs to be considered throughout the entire process. You must have an
Professor Marble.
Yeah.
How can we get this PowerPoint? Those of us in Dr. Lundy's class.
Aren't you sent the PowerPoint every week?
We don't have it now that I know of.
Okay. Oh, you just have to ask Dr. Lundy for the PowerPoints for, oh, this is for week 6. We're still in week 6, so you may have got it last week.
Okay.
So double check. That would have come out in your week 6 announcement. We haven't, and I think somebody said that she sent out a couple of reviews of recordings. Chelsea, you're the one I'm looking at because I can only see a few people because I share my screen. Did you guys get the PowerPoints for week 6?
But so yeah, in the announcement that she did where the recordings are, if Kim goes to the very bottom, she should see the downloads for the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
So.
At the
So
bottom in the bottom of the weekly announcements, you guys should have all the
Okay.
PowerPoints.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. So anyway, back to personal safety. You must have an awareness of the community before you're out in the community. How do you find out about the community? Right? Well, we'll see this in the book, but there are other nurses. You ask other nurses, you ask social workers, you ask other healthcare providers who are familiar with the community. Okay. And then by your own observations. Okay. Just trying to move to chapter 12. Hang on. Community assessment and evaluation. Okay, so we just went through a quick outline. So let's go through and identify what is the key essential knowledge that we need to know to understand community assessment, the concept of community assessment. Okay. So from the nursing process, from assessment through evaluation, we know the nursing process is used to promote community health. Okay, process begins with a community assessment, one of the core functions, which involves getting to know the community. So for example, if you're admitting a pediatric patient, you're doing an assessment. If you're admitting a stroke patient, you're doing an assessment. Well, it's the same with the community. If you are the new nurse that is the new community nurse at the public health department, you're going to be asked to do a community assessment. Okay. So how do we accomplish that? Well, first, it's helpful to know what is community. Here on page 204, okay, here's a couple of definitions of what a community is. All right. For purposes of this chapter, we are going to look at the community based on 3 dimensions. Okay, place, people, and function. We talked about that at the beginning of the outline. Okay, so have a look at table 12.1. Okay, where is it? What's the place? Where is it? How many square miles? What does transportation look like? Do they have rivers, highways, railroads? Right, and then this last section over here is, remember, we're doing a community assessment. So how do we gather data? Right here, here's our 3rd column. Examples of data sources. So how might we gain knowledge about the community itself, the boundaries, the size? Well, here's some ideas. Maps, local newspaper, census data. Okay, how do we gather information about the people of the community? What's the population? How many? Is it dense? Is it rural? What are the age groups? What is socioeconomic factors? How do we gather that data? Here's a list of ways to gather that data. Okay, it's not essential that you know every part of all these 3 boxes. What is essential is that you understand how a community is made up and how we look at a community. Through what lenses do we look at a community? The 3 main lenses are the place, the people, and the function. Okay, what's the function of the community? Are they an industrial? Are they a distribution community? Consumption? What do they do? What are they known for? Okay, and here's some areas where to get that information. Okay. Now, this is important because, again, remember, what are we doing? We're doing a community assessment. So what are some common community systems found in every community? Well, for the most part, these are the most common. Some may be more prevalent. Some of these may be more prevalent in communities than others. Okay, but here's a list of community systems. So if you were asked about this on the exam, what kind of question might it be?
Select all that apply.
Okay, Kim, and what would the question be? Or what might it be?
Identify the following that are community systems
Exactly.
in
Pick
most
up,
communities. I don't know.
yep, and select all that apply. But these are your 9 basic categories typically found in a community. Can everybody, if you think quickly, think about your own community. Do all these 9 make up your community?
Yes.
Yeah. Again, some may be, you know, safety may be more of an issue in a community that has a high crime rate. Okay. Okay. Then let's see. Hang on. I want to see. Okay. Here's the other. We want to take a look at community health. Okay. What are the 3 common characteristics? Okay. Of a community? Status, structure, and process. Okay. That starts on page 207. Okay. Each dimension reflects a unique aspect of the community. So for example, status. Okay. If you're assessing the status of the community, there's 3 ways to look at it right here: biological, emotional, and social. Okay. And I'll start with the first one and you can research the other 2. So if you're looking at the how to assess the biological or physical part of the community, you may be looking at morbidity and mortality rates, life expectancy rates, risk factor profiles. Structure, how is the structure of the community looked at? Structure refers to what kind of resources and services does the community have to offer? Well, that will determine on what the needs of the community are. You know, it's a community that has a lot of homeless. So there may be more homeless services. What resources are available? Okay, and then the process. The process is how well does the community function? Right? Or are they engaged? Are community members engaged in wanting the best for their community? Are they engaged together in problem solving? Does the school work with the parents? Does the law enforcement work with the population? Right? It's called community competence. Is everybody working together cohesively for the better of the community? So that's the process. How does the community function? Okay. And then here's a nice little summary of what we just talked about, 12.2. Okay. So again, this information, status, structure, and function, or excuse me, process, is important to understand as we go ahead and put together a community assessment. And again, here's what they look at, and here's some examples of data sources. Okay, Healthy People 2020 is here in this chapter. There's 4 goals. Okay, and these 4 goals are based on, let's see, Healthy People provides the foundation for national health promotion and disease prevention built on 4 goals. Okay, so we need to know those for this community assessment chapter. That's on page 209. And then another key essential knowledge that we need to understand as far as community assessment is what is the definition of what's a community partnership? Okay, think about community partnerships in your community. Do you have a lot of community partners that partner with your community to help problem solve, to help financially support things? Okay, we have 2 kinds of partnerships. We have an active and a passive. Okay, but in general, community partnership is necessary. When there is community partnership, and community members have a vested interest in the success of the community, it will lead to improvement of health, to the overall health of their community. Okay. So lay community members who are recognized as community leaders also possess credibility and skills to help the community, right? So for example, an active partnership would be things that directly affect the community right there, right then. So for example, the book, we use the example of providing healthy food snacks to after school programs in the schools. Has a direct impact. Okay. And then we have passive participation, which is just as effective, but it's kind of done behind the scenes. It's the planning, the assessing, the planning, the implementation. So let's say your community had a high crime rate, crime statistics. You have a whole group of community members that they're passively participating in planning what's going to happen. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But the purpose is to understand how important a community partnership is. I'm not real focused on active and passive, but there are differences. I just want to point that out. But as you're doing your community assessment, community partnerships are key to the successful functioning of a community. Okay. Okay. Community assessment, we know, is one of the 3 core functions of public health. Okay, so let's go through and talk about this. All right, so the assessment helps the nurse in the community to understand individual, family, and group problems and to know what community strengths are. Okay, the community assessment phase involves a logical, systemic approach to the initial phase of the nursing process. Okay, so this section right here is the beginning of slides 9, 10, and 11. Okay, so starting here, we are going through the whole nursing process of doing a community assessment. Okay. I still have 3 other chapters to cover, so I'm not going to go through all this. But I just wanted to point that out. So let's just do assessment. So the assessment helps the nurse in the community to understand whether it's an individual, family, or group problems, to know that the community strengths and resources are available to help the nurse solve their problems. Okay, so how do we identify? So we identify community needs, to clarify the problems, to identify the strengths and the resources, right? So how are we going to assess that? What are we going to do? Well, one of the biggest things we're going to do is data collection. Data collection is huge at a community assessment. Okay, and interpreting that data. And there's a difference between data gathering and data generation. I want you to understand the difference. Okay, data gathering is information that already exists. Okay, such as the age of your community, the gender distribution, racial distribution, that already exists. Okay, so you just need to understand where to find it. And if you go back to the box above, it tells you where's your best bet to gather that information. Okay, so often this data has already been collected by interviews, questionnaires, surveys, and they're available in published reports at the library or local public health department, right? So data gathering information, this data gives the nurse a snapshot of how the clients receive services in their community. On the other hand, what is data generation, right? So you're having to generate data, so it doesn't already exist, right? So data generation is the process of developing data that does not exist. How are we going to do that? Well, interaction with the community members, individuals, families, or groups. Okay. How do we what's the best way to gain information about the values and beliefs in the community? What are their goals? What are their perceived needs? What are the issues they think are in the community? Okay. So how are we going to collect our data for our data gathering? Here's a couple of ways right here. Informant interviews, participant observation, windshield surveys, and regular surveys. Okay. And then this goes through, if you want to read about a windshield survey. What is a windshield survey? We've already talked about it. What's a windshield survey?
Basically just like observing from either like your car or like your community, and like just looking through like a window basically and
Yep.
seeing like
Exactly. You're doing a survey, a drive-through, drive-by of your community. What kinds of things are you looking for in a windshield survey? Maybe playgrounds, roads, recreation centers, where people gather. Is it a small town? Is it a bigger town? What are the boundaries? Okay. And here's some, identify the key informant for interviews. Who would you, if you were doing a community assessment, who might you want to interview to gather information? Here's an example of some of the key informants: county health departments, church leaders, community members who nurses know and can identify other key informants. Who do I go talk to about this? Who has the best knowledge about this, best experience? Maybe the president of the PTA. How are the schools functioning? What goes on in the schools? Their after school activities or their sports? Maybe the political people, mayor, other local politicians. What do they think about the community? Another example, a mother who organized a local chapter of Mothers Against Drunk Driving. You have to be able to identify key stakeholders in the community that can help you formulate your community assessment. Okay. Okay. That's what I want to cover in this chapter. Do you have a better understanding? Let me make sure I have covered everything. Active passive partnerships, data gathering versus data generation, windshield survey. Cool. Okay. Anybody have any questions? And again, I'm going to point out that you have a excellent case study for chapter 12 that has excellent rationales. Okay. In fact, this rationale for question 1 in chapter 12 is all about what a windshield survey is. Okay. Second rationale is about who your key informants are. So good information. Okay, let's jump to chapter 25, which is violence and human abuse. This is a tough chapter. Okay. I want you to take a look at the objectives. And again, like I tell you every week, you need to be able to articulate these objectives. After you've reviewed the PowerPoint, the chapter, and the lecture, we should be able to talk about each one of these. Okay. So this chapter is about violence. We know that there's significant mortality and morbidity with relation to violence. And it doesn't matter what area of nursing we're in. Okay. We are always going to be caring for victims, perpetrators, and people who have even witnessed the violence. We're not going to get away from that. All right. So we can take an active role in developing responses, community responses to violence. Okay. Really important for us to be engaged in that. What are some of the social and community factors that influence violence? Work. We hear about workplace violence. Education. We hear about school shootings. Media. Think of what we watch on TV. Think of how much violence is portrayed on television. Violence against certain religions, organized religion, violence, social and community factors. Okay, population, community facilities. I'm going to have you guys review this, but each starting on 5, it goes through each of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them. Goes through each of them. So here is social and community factors regarding work. Okay, education, especially education. That's my specialty, right? So we talk about school shootings, we talked about bullying, harassment, suicide. Lots of factors in each of these social issues. Media, television programs, religion. Okay. What I'd like to focus on, here's a couple of definitions of violence. Homicide, assault, sexual violence, and then suicide. Okay. What does family violence and abuse look like? Can you recognize it? If clients come to wherever you're working, can you identify the signs and symptoms of family violence and abuse? Can you identify the symptoms of child abuse or neglect? What about sexual abuse? Can you identify sexual abuse when somebody comes to your ER or your clinic? Physical abuse, elder abuse, big. Can you identify elder abuse? Let's say you're going out in the community doing your home visits. Can you identify elder abuse? Do you know what it's made up of? Do you know what the signs and symptoms are? Same in the community. That's why we always say a home visit is the best kind of visit that you can do for assessments. Whether you're doing a family assessment, an environmental health assessment, a safety assessment, family violence assessment. When you go out to do a home visit, you can add this to the kind of assessment that you can get done. Let's say you're going out to do a home visit to change a dressing or give an IV med. Think of all the things you can observe. You can observe safety, you can observe family interactions, you can observe potential signs of abuse, you can observe environmental risks. Okay. So nursing interventions identify potential victims of family abuse, right? And here's what we just said, because nurses see clients in a variety of settings, such as schools, businesses, homes, clinics. Provide interventions for each level of prevention. Okay, and I'll show you that in the book. Okay. So we are on page 433, violence and human abuse. What I want to focus on is primary strategies of what we can do in the community to help prevent violence. That's what I want to focus on in this chapter. Okay, here's your healthy people. We need to know that too. Healthy people on page 434 is what are their objectives for reducing violence. So if you get a Healthy People 2020 question, it says that's a select all that apply or not select all that apply. It says, please identify what would be an objective for reducing violence. If it's from Healthy People 2020, it has to be one of these. There's 100 other objectives out here that you or I think are good or our community thinks are good. But if they're not Healthy People 2020 and it's a Healthy People 2020 question, it's the wrong answer. It may be a good answer for community in general, but if it's not Healthy People 2020, it's not the right answer. And then the chapter then goes through starting on 434, all the social areas we talked about: work, education, the media, organized religion, population, community facilities. Okay. Next section is the definitions of violence: homicide, assault, sexual violence and rape, suicide. Okay. And then there's a whole section on family violence and abuse. Okay. I would like for you to read through that. We're not going to go through that. I want to focus on primary prevention. Okay. But this is how to recognize family violence, whether it's with your grandparent, your kid, intimate partner abuse. Okay. It's very informative. Development of abusive patterns, types of family violence. I like this box, abuse. If you can you recognize these symptoms, right? If we know that abuse is about power and control, and we start doing our assessment and we start to learn some of these things, right? We have to have a basic understanding about what violence, what are the underlying factors for violence. Okay, before we can understand how to recognize all these kinds of abuses, child abuse, and then it goes through determining risk factors for child abuse. How to identify potentially abusive parents. This was a constant challenge of mine when I worked in the school for 20 years. Identifying child neglect, child abuse, how to identify potentially abusive parents. Okay. How to recognize actual or potential child abuse. Okay. As nurses, we're not immune to this. We do have to, I mean, in the community, I think we have a much bigger obligation because we're out in the community. And remember, we're all mandated reporters, right? What does that mean? What is a mandate? We are all mandated reporters. What do we have to do?
If you
You
suspect
the right thing.
abuse, you have to report it.
Report what?
The suspected abuse.
Of anybody, right? Not just kids, elderly, intimate partner. We are mandated reporters. There was a question on the exam that it was a priority question. It was about abuse and all the answers were correct, but what was the priority? It was report to the authorities. It was safety. It was a safety question, right? So I think it was in the pastoral, it was in faith-based nursing. What are you going to do if you go do a visit and you see that a 3-year-old has bruises and the mom has bruises? What is the first priority? Well, the correct answer was report to the authorities. The other 3 answers were correct, but they happened after you did the primary intervention. Does that make sense? Okay.
You wouldn't ask how they got the bruises first?
No. Well, it's a very fine line. What if they tell you they fell down the flight of stairs, but they were pushed? How do you determine if what they're telling you is the truth? Right? I mean, you could ask, how did your 3-year-old get bruises all over their face? And they may say he fell off his bike. Okay. But you don't know that. And so you would have to report that and let the authorities sort out what actually happened. Your goal is to report. Your goal is not to find out if they're lying or if it's the truth. Your goal is to report it so the proper authorities can investigate it. I mean, working in school nursing for 20 years, it seems like all I did. A lot, make reports. Who just asked that question?
It was me, Louis.
Oh, hey, Louis. Does my answer make sense?
It does, somewhat.
Explain, keep talking.
No, it's just like if she said, like, if she had a valid reason of having the bruise, I don't think maybe she's a hemophiliac.
Right. Okay. So how do
Mhm.
you determine whether it's valid or not?
I don't. I
Exactly.
would just, yeah.
So, certainly if she had a history of hemophilia, of course, there are underlying circumstances in which things may be going on, but you have to be able to play the devil's advocate as well. Right?
I see
So,
your point.
okay. Here's how to identify elder abuse. Okay, here's what I want to cover right here. How can we help? Since violence is such a problem in our communities, how can we help? Okay, so we're talking about primary prevention here. All right, it begins with a community approach. So I'm on page 448. Really important to understand in understanding the concept of violence, of how we can help. And this is from a community standpoint. Primary prevention begins with a community approach that incorporates strategies from, this is important, these are partnerships. Okay, we need help from the criminal justice section or sector. We need help from the education, the schools, social services, community advocacy, and public health to prevent violence. This is a team effort. We can't do it alone as nurses. We need to seek out help. And these are the most common areas in the community to reach out to: criminal justice, education, schools, social services, community advocacy, and public health. All right. And with the goal of trying to prevent or reduce violence. And here are some examples of primary prevention that communities have used. Okay. So, and I think these are excellent. Okay. So this is primary prevention. Think primary, education, prevention. Okay. As we go through each one of those. School-based curriculum to teach children and youth how to cope with their anger and stress and frustration. Maybe teach them communication and meditation skills. Why is that primary?
You're teaching a skill to before it happens.
Correct. Before the bad tempers are developed and those things, correct. Another community has family programs to teach parents how to deal with their children more effectively. Why is that primary? What are we trying to prevent? Think about our chapter. What are we trying to prevent?
Abuse.
Correct. Preschool programs that develop intellectual and social skills. Why is that primary? What are we trying to prevent? Maybe isolation, right? And isolation could potentially lead to what? Mental health issues, potentially violence.
Dropping out of school.
Dropping out of school, exactly. Exactly. Next, public education programs that educate communities about different forms of violence and ways to get help and intervene. Why is that primary?
Because you're educating them about the violence and showing them where to get help for it, I guess.
Exactly. Is you're educating them on what kind of what does violence look like? What are different forms of violence? What does child abuse look like? What does elder abuse look like? What does gang activity look like? What does this look like? And you're providing them ahead of time possible ways to get help and intervene. So providing maybe what resources are located the community has. Nurse home visitation programs with families at risk that aim to prevent child abuse and neglect. Why is that primary? Actually, this one's secondary. Why is that secondary?
Because of screening for abuse.
Early identification, exactly. Nursing home visitation programs with families at risk that aim to prevent child abuse and neglect. So important, right? Because what is secondary about? Early identification of at risk, and then with early identification comes early interventions, right? And then last is lobbying for passage of legislation to outlaw physical punishment in schools and marital rape. Why is that important? Why is that primary?
Because you're trying to prevent it by making a law.
Mhm. Yep. Because we know what's happened. We know what the history is, right? Well, the history tells us that this doesn't work. Physical punishment doesn't work in the schools, or at least that's what the research says. So we're trying to prevent this from being, let's say, a nationwide law, that it's okay. Does that make sense? So that's what I want you to take away from that chapter, is how we can help. And again, this case study is excellent right here. You should have received that in your week 7 announcement from me. Okay. Rationales talk about youth violence, bullying. Okay. Talks about we just went through this. Primary prevention. You'll have seen it 3 times. So this is important. You just saw it in the book. Here it is in a rationale, what we just went through. And if anybody's looked ahead, it's in the study guide. Okay. Okay. Chapter 26, infectious disease and control. Okay. Have a look at the objectives. After reviewing this chapter, you should be able to answer these questions. Okay, so let's go through this. We're kind of running out of time here, but I'm going to do my best. We do have a worldwide concern about infectious diseases, right? We have a concern with the increase in the amount of infectious diseases, and especially the growth of migration. What do we mean about migration? What does that mean? That people travel all over, right? As people move from one place to the other, they bring their diseases. They also bring their levels of immunity, and they bring their resistance to diseases and viruses and bacteria they may harbor that has not emerged yet, right? We don't need to worry about historical perspectives, but how are they transmitted? In a previous chapter, we've already talked about the agent. What's the agent, host, and environment? What is that? Come on, you need to know this. What does the agent, host, and environment make up?
The epidemic pyramid.
Epidemiological triangle. What's the agent? What's an agent? What's the agent? We just had this on the.
It's the disease. It's the virus.
Bacteria.
Chemical, whatever.
Organ. Yeah.
Yep. What's the host? Yep. What's the host?
Person or the animal.
Yep. So that's us. An agent needs a host to infect, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then what about the environment? Why is that significant in this formula, in this mix? Well, we don't know what's going on in the environment. Let's take COVID, for example. Let's take the elderly. They're more at risk to develop serious illnesses from COVID. What if the environment is a nursing home? Does that place them at higher risk?
Absolutely.
Yes. So we have to look at what are the environmental factors and how are they going to affect the agent and the host? Okay. So let's say you have the agent is COVID. Your first host is a high school baseball team, and your other host is elderly population. Your environment is the high school with the baseball team, and the other environment is a nursing home. Is one group going to probably be less affected by the COVID than the other group?
Yes.
Of course. So the environment plays a significant role as to how that agent affects the host. Does that make sense? Or am I confusing you? Please speak up.
Can you repeat that? It's Tanyana. I got a little confused.
Okay. So your agent, let's take COVID, for example. Your agent is COVID. Your host is all of us. We're all hosts. Okay. Some of us may be more immunocompromised than others, right? So some of us may end up with a case of mild COVID versus severe COVID, right? And whatever environmental factors are going on will play into how the agent and host interact. Does that make sense? So let's say, again, let's use COVID, for example. Let's say we're in a nursing home. Is the environment of a nursing home going to play an important role about how their clients are affected? Just a simple environment of being in a nursing home.
I would say yes, because how it would spread.
Of course. And think of the population. What are the risks of the host population? They're elderly. They may have lots of comorbidities, right? And the COVID's a pretty serious viral agent, right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes, when you use COVID as an example, it makes much more sense.
Yeah. Okay. This is one of our attestation questions. Okay. What are the 4 emerging infectious diseases? And when we say emerging, we mean over the last couple of decades. Okay, here they are: Ebola, HIV, influenza, and West Nile. Okay. Here's an excellent slide again on primary, secondary, and tertiary with regards to communicable diseases. Okay, so let's read through it. Primary seeks to reduce the incidence of disease by preventing it before it happens. Do you understand why that's primary?
Yes.
Secondary aims to prevent the spread once it occurs. Early identification, early intervention. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Tertiary, work to reduce the complications and disabilities through treatment. So let's say you have contracted one of these communicable diseases. Okay, tertiary is working, educating, working, teaching to reduce complications and disabilities. Okay. Vaccines. We know that we do have vaccine preventable diseases. Here they are: measles, rubella, pertussis, influenza. We do know that we have food and waterborne diseases, right? We do know that we have vector-borne diseases. Remember what this chapter is: infectious diseases. Okay, we do know that we have parasitic diseases. Okay, and we have disease of travelers. Okay, and we also do know that we have healthcare acquired infections, right? Infections acquired during hospitalization or developed within a hospital setting. Give me an example of one.
MRSA.
Exactly. Everybody understand that?
Yes.
Okay. I want to take you to the book because I want you to go through what I want. There's a few. I'm not so much worried about. Hang on. I want to go through and review real quick for a couple of minutes about vaccinations. Okay. So I'm on page 455. Okay. I would like for you to read through this section. Okay. Because when we talk about vaccines, we talk about preventable infectious diseases. Okay. And vaccines, we know, are the most effective method in preventing and controlling communicable diseases. Would you all agree with that? Okay. At least in kids, the diseases polio, diphtheria, pertussis, measles, which previously occurred in epidemic proportions, are now controlled by childhood immunizations. Okay. But sometimes we run into issues like being in the schools. We run into issues where kids aren't vaccinated. Could be for a variety of reasons, whether they're in a high risk group, right? So here's a couple of our high risk groups. Many infants and toddlers, which are the groups most vulnerable to these potentially severe diseases, don't receive immunizations on time. Okay, despite that they have availability for free vaccines. Survey shows that inner city kids from minority and ethnic groups are particularly at risk for incomplete immunizations. Maybe kids from religious communities whose beliefs prohibit immunizations, or parents who have a philosophical objection. Okay, so how do you deal with that? Well, we have to first start with trying to educate these parents and helping them understand that vaccines are the most effective method in preventing and controlling these diseases. Well, what if they're still not vaccinated? Then what do we do? Well, for the schools, what we did was if we had an outbreak of pertussis, we would go through our vaccination records. Who doesn't have the pertussis vaccine? Those are the parents we would contact first to keep them out of school until the outbreak subsided, because they're way more at risk for contracting it, especially not being immunized. Right? So that's what I want you to, part of the understanding of infectious disease and communicable diseases is understanding the significance of the vaccines and how they play a significant role in prevention. Okay. And I also want you to understand, let's go through this box real quick, our levels of prevention related to infectious disease. Okay, and here's an excellent summary. What is the goal? To prevent the occurrence of disease. This is related to infectious disease. So our goal is to prevent. So what might we do? We would educate about safe food handling practices in the home. Understand why that's primary?
Page is that on?
Oh, we're on page 463. Secondary, to prevent the spread of the disease. Right, so we've identified the high-risk group, right? We want to prevent the spread. So our intervention is to immediately evaluate the possible source of any food outbreak. So we're doing a screening, right? And then what's the goal of tertiary? To reduce the complications and disabilities associated or through treatment and rehabilitation. So let's assume that you have a group of people that had a foodborne outbreak, and they present with all the symptoms, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. Well, tertiary, we're treating the symptoms because they already have had the event, right? So we're trying to reduce complications and disabilities from that foodborne outbreak. Make sense? Okay. So that's that chapter. And then the last chapter, I think we're already at 255 and I don't want to, this chapter is I'd like to review on your own. We're talking about four different issues: HIV, hepatitis, TB, and sexually transmitted diseases. Okay. We know that these four diseases are often acquired through behaviors that can be avoided or changed. Okay. So when we work with these, when we work in the primary prevention level, we are trying to educate and prevent. Because once these happen, these are lifelong issues that you're dealing with symptom management. Okay. So with these, we'd like to focus considerably on disease prevention, and prevention can take the form of vaccine administration, early detection, or teaching clients about the abstinence or safer sex. right? Because we know that individuals with any of these are chronic infections, can transmit them to others. Okay, so I wanted to give you that introduction because starting on slide 4, slides 4 through 8 are HIV.
Dayan! Hello, kung sala sa karad stats.
Oops,
Mm.
hang on. Okay, slide 9 are your STDs. Okay, when you talk, the one thing I want to mention about STDs, why do we have to screen pregnant women for STDs? Or we like to screen everybody for STDs, but why pregnant women?
Because they can give it to their baby during birth.
Yeah, and what happens, you know, with STDs, we have viral and bacterial, and there is a box in chapter 27 that I want you to go back and look, and it talks about STDs with regards to pregnancy. It talks about viral. Let's go find it, so you know. It talks about viral and bacterial. 1 second. Okay, I'm at page 478. Well, number 1, on page 478, here's your Healthy People 2020. Okay, these are objectives pertaining to communicable diseases. Okay, reduce the number of HIV, reduce gonorrhea rates, reduce hepatitis B. So you already know to go back and review that, but I want to talk about hang on. Okay, right here. So bear with me till I come upon this. It goes through each of the STDs they talk about in the PowerPoint. But what I'm trying to get to is bear with me. Hang on. I need for you guys to understand right here. Okay. There are some STDs that are bacterial. There are some, and bacterial we can treat with antibiotics, but viral we can't. Okay. So the 3 main STDs we worry about: gonorrhea, syphilis, and chlamydia. But I want to point out that with gonorrhea, or excuse me, syphilis, this is the particular one that pregnant women can pass on to their babies. Okay. I know there's a chart here that talks about the different STDs that can. Oh, let's look at this real quick. Okay. Here's an excellent, I'll find that chart, but here's an excellent box about levels of prevention. Okay. Related to these 4 chronic diseases. Okay.
You got bacterial and viral on 483 and 484.
Yeah, but there's okay. Anyway, I'll go back to that. Thank you. But please review page 491. Okay, this is a good one. This is actually a really good one. It gives several examples for each. There we go. Thank you. Okay, so table 27.1. Okay, here's your summary. I don't need you to know everything about each box. I just like you to know, is it viral? Is it bacterial? Does it transmit transplacentally? Those kinds of things. Okay. All right. So here they are: your chlamydia, gonorrhea, your syphilis. Okay. All right. So please review those. Okay. That was a quick coverage of the last chapter. It's already 5 o'clock. So I need everybody real quick to pull up their attestation. Let's get this done so that everybody's not, so that we get it turned in today. I know we covered a lot of information. Helpful? I talked too fast, too much information. How are we doing at the end of 2 hours? How are we all feeling?
We're good.
You covered a lot, but I mean, I feel like you explained it pretty well, and so it was easy to understand.
Okay. All right. I remember the second question, but I don't remember the first. What's the first question? For your attestation.
It is when discussing family violence and abuse, what are the signs of abuse?
Okay. What are they?
Bruises.
There's a lot of signs. What are they? Bruises, eye contact. What else? Silence. What other signs are there? Just throw them out there.
Unmet basic needs.
Mhm. Excellent. Good one. Anybody else?
Untreated health problems, poor nutrition.
Poor nutrition is an excellent one.
Recurring genital infections.
Yep. Poor nutrition is a good one. Let's give me an example of what would be a symptom of elder abuse.
Bruises in different stages of healing.
Excellent. Excellent.
Wasting.
What?
Wasting, like.
Yep. Maybe sores. Red sores. Okay. And what's the second question? It's the 4 emerging infectious diseases. What are they?
HIV, Ebola, flu, or whatever the
Influenza. Yep.
And West Nile.
And West Nile. Thanks, Kim. And thank you, Lana. So you have your 2 attestation questions done. All you have to do is click submit, and then you don't have to worry about that.
Can you repeat the last one? It was HIV, Ebola, influenza, and what was the last one?
West Nile.
West Nile, yeah.
Well, thanks to all Dr. Lundy students who joined us. Thanks for all your participation. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us.
Oh, I know what I want to show you guys real quick. Hang on. I want to show you. Here's what we sent out. Here's all your review sessions starting next week. But I highlighted for my group. So for today, here's what we covered. Okay, so I want you sometime between now and next week, I want you to go through these 5 sections and compare what we just did and make sure you understand all the information on the study guide with regards to these 5 sections. Okay, so this was community assessment and evaluation was chapter 12. Okay, skipping down, because I don't want you, don't look at next week's part for the study guide. Don't look at it yet. Let's focus on this week. Okay. This was chapter 11, using health information. Okay. Skip down to violence and human abuse. This was chapter 25. Infectious disease and prevention was chapter 26. And then we just covered this chapter 27. So before you jump to next week, please make sure you take all the information that you learned today and the notes. You go through these 5 sections of the study guide first. Make sure we have a solid understanding of what's in the study guide. Okay. And then we'll cover the rest of this next week. There's 8 chapters to cover next week. I'm not saying don't look at it, but let's make sure that we have an understanding of this week before we move into next week. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
That's what I would do. You don't have to do that, but that's what I would suggest. Right? Make sure we covered all this. So by the end of next week, everything on the study guide, I should have covered. Right? If I didn't cover it, then I'm not, I need to cover it, because we believe that all the information in the study guide is essential knowledge in having you understand these concepts. Okay? Does that help? That's what I would do.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. 6 minutes over. I apologize. Anybody needs to stay on after to ask me any questions, I'll stay on. Otherwise, everybody's excused, and have a great rest of the week.
You too. Feel better.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You feel
Thank
better.
you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Professor Marvel, can
Yes?
I talk with you
Yeah.
once everyone gets off?
Yeah. Who's talking? Allie?
Allie, I
Okay.
just need to switch over to my phone instead of my computer because
Do what you need to do.
I'm having trouble with my computer.
Okay. Allie, there you are. I can't hear you yet. I can't hear you yet.
Sorry, I had to drive my little sister to work, but I'm not driving right now,
Okay.
if that
Go.
helps.
Yep. Go.
I don't know if you want to turn off the recording for this or not.
Oh, yeah.